So Kamala Harris has dropped out of the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. That's not really a surprise at this stage because her polling just hasn't been there. She has no base of support. She isn't really even that strong in her home state. She has no signature policy that sets her apart from anybody else. And given all of that, it's no surprise that at this stage, it was time for her to call it quits, even though she had qualified for the next round of debates. Because Harris had built such a large campaign infrastructure because she felt she could win the contest, when you start to flounder, it becomes prohibitively expensive to continue. Whereas if you're a very small candidate who has a very lean infrastructure, you can sort of continue longer even though it's clear you won't ultimately win. Harris dropping out for a lot of people is seen as a disappointment. She was a woman of color in a party that relies so heavily on women of color for its success. Not only their votes, but a lot of their labor, a lot of their people power, a lot of that work done on the ground, volunteered and paid labor to ensure the party succeeds. And there was a hope that a woman of color could lead this party. But I don't know if Harris represents the progressive values of Democrats. Her position as a prosecutor in California upheld privilege and didn't challenge it. She used her position to basically excuse white-collar crime and to crack down on poor and racialized people. To use marijuana laws to basically lock up people that shouldn't be locked up, even though she used the drug recreationally and never faced consequences for it. She allowed prisoners to fight fires at slave wages. She allowed all of these things to happen. Kamala Harris did back Medicare for All, at least initially. She was a co-sponsor of Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill. But like Elizabeth Warren, she flip-flopped on it. It's very unclear what Kamala Harris believes in terms of Medicare for All, if she believes in it at all. And even in terms of finding demographic niches, Kamala Harris couldn't do it. She never really built a solid basis of support amongst African Americans. Whether it was because Cory Booker is also in the race, and he's another prominent African American, or whether it's because Joe Biden, by virtue of being Barack Obama's vice president, was absorbing a lot of that support, she could never really build a, strong basis even amongst fellow African Americans. And so for all of those reasons, Kamala Harris had no path to victory. But Kamala Harris dropping out and why Kamala Harris failed is less important than discussing the role of the media in all of this. Because the role of the media has been exposed repeatedly during this entire process. From the very beginning, the media has pushed people like Klobuchar and Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg and Beto O'Rourke and others, many others, most of whom have crashed and burned already or are in the process of crashing and burning, or maybe will find success in the case of Buttigieg, but it's not quite evident, at least yet. And throughout this entire process, you've seen it. You've seen people say, well, Harris is the one. She's got the special sauce. She's got the policy. She's got the vision. She fits the demography. She's just on the verge of breaking out, and it never happens. The same thing with Beto. All of that attention, and it never happened. And the whole point is not that the media was wrong. Not that the media was, they made a good faith guess and they got it wrong. I really feel this was all they could do to try to distract from Bernie Sanders, to basically try to create various messiah figures that would challenge for the nomination and would shake things up. And you could talk about them till the cows came home, so you wouldn't have to talk about Bernie. Biden was the leader. We all sort of knew that. Biden would get his attention. But, you didn't want it to become a Biden versus Bernie race because that means you would have to cover Bernie. As I noted in my previous video earlier today, the whole point of the media narrative around Bernie is to ignore him wherever possible. So you create these other candidates. You create Harris. You create Buttigieg. You create Beto. You create Klobuchar. Some of these people had no natural basis of support. Some of them might have, but it hadn't become evident yet, and yet you pump them anyway. Because the media hopes that if you give them coverage and you say they're viable, that makes them viable. That will give them increased polling and increased fundraising and increased endorsements, which can be used to further perpetuate increased coverage. All the while, you're ignoring and discrediting Bernie Sanders. So the media, whether they were disingenuous in trying to pump people like Harris up, or whether it shows just how out of touch they are with the actual perceptions and values and objectives and desires of the Democratic primary base, they failed again to accurately capture what's happening on the ground. If you go back to who they were pumping up in January, the only person in that top 5 that's really still around is Joe Biden, and that's not really a surprise. Biden has remained in the lead, but Harris is done. Beto is done. Klobuchar never really took off. A lot of these people just had no real path forward. And it's really, really troubling that the media is either this incompetent or this misleading of the public's desires and who they feel can actually win. Because at the end of the day, you need to have a basis of support and you need to have an ideological anchor. Harris never had that. O'Rourke never had that. Klobuchar doesn't have that. Pete Buttigieg, in my mind, doesn't have that. And so the media either ignores this reality or obscures the reality. And the whole point, again, is to discount the fact that Bernie Sanders has consistently been one of the mainline challengers, and this whole narrative building process to find the person that they can use to justify cutting Bernie Sanders out of the coverage process has failed time and time and time again. So Kamala Harris was a candidate with great potential in some ways, but her regressive actions as a prosecutor, her lack of commitment to progressive ideas, her failure to capture the imagination of specific demographics and of the general Democratic Party have all spelt out why she failed. But the biggest narrative here, but the most important fact here is that until the very end, the mainstream media refused to reckon with why Kamala Harris wasn't resonating and with the fact that she had no real shot.